Okay. Should I look in the camera or
You
look
can
at
look
you?
at me, yeah.
Okay, great. I'll look at you. All right. So my name is Young, which is it's actually Young O LePage, but I go by Young. I've been going by that for a very long time. When I was about 19, one of my first jobs I had in New York City was at Limelight. And it wasn't a glamorous position. It's probably the lowest rung you could be. I was a busboy. And I remember going in for the interview, and it was back there in the office area that you'd enter in on, like, what was it, 20th Street, I think it is, on the corner of 20th. And you'd go through there. I think that was like the entrance for the resurrection party or something on, when was resurrection? I can't remember what night that was. Maybe Saturday night? And so you go through the back, and then we're all sitting around, but everybody there who showed up wanted to be a bartender. And I was like, I'm not prepared to be a bartender. I was like, whatever you got, bar back, busboy. And out of all the people who were there, they said, okay, you're hired. And that was it, because my goals weren't very lofty. And and so I remember a bit just being a madhouse. And I also remember it being much bigger. I think everybody goes through this. They just remember things being much bigger. And I remember going back when it was turned into that kind of open market, and you'd go in there, and I was like, wait, this is like the whole, like, the disco area. This is like the stage. This is where the bar was. There's all the stuff, and that's where they hung them, like the cage dancers up there. It's like, this is tiny. I cannot believe it. I remember seeing, like, on certain nights they'd have these rock shows, and they had, like, Henry Rollins was playing, and we were up there. I remember being up on top and looking down, and it was a sea of people. And then I go there now, and I'm like, what? And I remember on Tuesday nights was communion, and that was like industrial music. And I remember there's this guy who's such a great dancer, and he had like white shirts. It might have said, like, whatever. We used to make fun of it, Einstein's New Buttons. Whatever the band was. And it might have been like kind of like written on a stage, but he would just flail in this most beautiful way to this hardcore, like, industrial music. And I remember him just taking up the whole dance floor, because it was never really packed on that night. And I remember him just like, he just was everywhere. And when I went back there, I was like, I can't believe that this was happening in such a small space again. Like, it's that kind of, maybe it's your naivete when you come to New York, things, when you look back, they're like much bigger. And then when you see them later, I think I went to an old movie theater that I worked out on Broadway in 84th or somewhere around there. It was a Lowe's. I remember them having this really long escalator. And I went there and I was like, whoa, this thing is tiny. Like, it was like a half a floor. Anyways, so back to Limelight. I remember that they had one of those gyroscopes. Limelight always had these weird kind of contraptions that they'd show up with every once in a while. They had Topiary, that area with all the hedges and stuff, and they had these two virtual reality machines there, and people would get in those. I don't know what night that was. And then I remember going into the big dance floor with the stained glass, and they had this like gyroscope that you could be inside of, and you'd spin around. And then again, when I went back and looked at that space, is how did that huge contraption fit here with the floor being just like packed full of people? It's really bizarre. So Sunday was Rock and Roll Church, and then Wednesdays was Disco 2000, right? And I think Tuesdays, was communion, and I think Saturday was just your regular, like Fridays and Saturdays was like the Bridge and Tunnel crowd. So that was mostly like techno, but and I forget what Thursday was. I don't even remember if they were even open on Mondays, but as a busboy, it was, you'd have these like trays, and I remember sometimes fights would break out, and you'd say, like, I was in the chapel area, which was in the back, and they said, whenever a fight would break out, deposit your glasses to the nearest bar, because they didn't want people picking them up and using them to crack each other's heads open. And then, there was a really bad fight one night. I remember I was in the bathrooms, and I was cleaning, and we didn't have like female cleaners going to female bathrooms, like you just did it, and if you were that was your area by the library, the VIP upstairs, you kind of like cover that area, I think. Or maybe that was the second floor bar, whatever. So I go in, and there's this guy, he's like harassing these women, he's like looking over the stalls. This probably happens at many bars all over the city. And I go, and I was like, whoa, this is messed up. So I tell a security guard, And he's like, all right. And so he's like running up, and it's near the end of the night. And before I know it, I'm like mopping up drops of blood all the way out to the front because somebody had pulled out a razor in this fight, and it was just crazy. It just went nuts. Some nights there'd be like a huge fight at the Palladium, which is on 14th, and of course that was owned by Gation as well. And for some reason they said, let's all go to Limelight if it gets shut down. And like at the Palladium, you put 800 people in there, and it looks empty. And then you put 800 people inside Limelight, and it looks like packed all those little rooms. And so then that would get flooded, full of people, and it's near the end of the night. I guess they're just trying to make as much money as they can at the bar at that point. And so they let all these people in, and then I remember some nights cleaning up after that, and it'd be like little things of mace all over the place. We found some bullets on the floor. Like it was just things that you would sweep up there were like just insane. There was a lot of partying on our side of it as well. So just to get through the night, it was a bit of drinking and a little this, a little that. I remember on New Year's Eve there was 5 of all of that happening at once, and working there was like that. And then we would, after it was closed, we would stay in the chapel area. We'd count our tips, and all of us busboys and barbacks, we would hang out and just drink and drink and drink. So the place closes out at 5, and by the time we're out of there, like the sun was up, we're like all, because our standard dress clothes was like black, we're all just like going out in our sunglasses and just drank the bar dry pretty much, and they didn't care. Nobody really cared back then. I do remember the club kids a lot. I had some friends who were club kids, and I later sort of dabbled into that after I left Limelight when I was hanging out at Club USA and over at Twilo, which was Sound Factory at the time. But I do remember those outfits and everything. But the big thing that always was that I remember was the lunch boxes. So they had the lunch boxes with their paraphernalia inside, and always with the platform shoes, and that was always a big thing. And I remember getting my first Doc Martens that had the steel toes, and I cut them out and then put some big platforms on there, and just really felt legit back then. And you could go to any shoe place and they just knew. They were like, you want platforms? How thick? Like 2 inches, 3 inches, stuff like that. And then you'd see some guys. I remember one time we were at the tunnel, and because they had the bathroom where everybody hung out, and I think Junior Vasquez said, I want the bathroom to have their own DJ because I don't want people in the bathroom like doing whatever, listening to my music. So we would hang out in the bathroom, obviously, because there's doors and you can go into the stalls and do whatever you want and stuff. And I just remember some of these club kids just coming in, and one guy just had like these enormous shoulder pads with this giant cape, and he had like his platform shoes that had his name like carved into them, like the platform part was like his name in block letters. And this is like when I was kind of like dabbling into it. I had this very kind of like uniform thing going on, because in my mind, everybody wore a uniform, so I kind of wanted to play on that. I remember going to a party once, and I had like this uniform on, and this person came up. She had her like this very grunge look, and she came up and said, "I don't like what that uniform stands for." And I said, "Well, I think everybody wears uniforms." She goes, "Huh?" I said, "I bet you only have like 3 versions of that outfit." So that was my statement. Didn't last long. That was like a blip. So yeah, it was a good time. It was like interesting. It was like getting a front row seat to everything that was cool about New York City at that time. And the crowds that would show up were so much more diverse than what I think of now. But I haven't done clubbing in a long time, so I don't know. I normally do underground parties. I've been in the underground party scene for about 20 years, helping to produce parties, big warehouse parties, this party, that party. And the crowds that would show up, like there was space for these people. There was space for the guy who just came up from Wall Street, and there was like, he had a role to play there, and there was people from all over would come, and there was never this kind of snobbery about who's cool and not cool. Like everybody had their space within that space, and I thought that was very, very important, and I don't really see that much anymore. I think there's like a division. And I found that like when I went to California, like these scenes were huge. So afterwards, I would gone to California, Southern California. If you go to a hootenanny out there, it's like wall-to-wall rockabilly dudes. Like there's no what I call the New York mix. There's just never really that New York mix. If you went to a goth place or an industrial place, it's just like wall to wall. Like there was just no, yeah, just that lovely East Coast New York mix that I really missed when I was out there. So that's about it.
So you noticed a lot of changes, like the way the club scene doesn't exist now, or what it's turned into. You know, and you said you're producing parties?
Yeah, I was working with Rubby Lad for 20 years. Oh God, since they were on South Fifth Street, and then I became kind of like their lighting guy, and then I was always kind of like the go-to guy of like when Sari or Chris, who run the parties, were, you know, what do you think, Young? Should I do this? Should I do that? And a lot of it had to do with that we called away games when they lost their space on Flushing Avenue. We would find various spots and we'd have an away game. So we'd have to come with all of our infrastructure and we'd have to know like where can we put a go-go dancer, when can we do this, how do we seal off this room, seal that room. So like I was kind of like the big picture guy there for a while. And that got a little taxing because I was working a full-time job at the same time. So and I had a kid, so it was hard. But yeah, I found that those scenes, there's this kind of homogenous thing that's happening at those kind of parties. I don't want to say hipster. You know, actually, I felt fortunate because Rugby Lad did have a little bit more of a mix and it was a little bit more of a mature crowd. But sometimes we get a very young crowd. They're all like all college kids, and we're just like, whoa, how did that happen? And they had such a variety of things that you could like at Rugby Lad, whether it's the guy throwing up the old film strips, or the cabaret acts, or the 3 or 4 bands that are happening, or the couple of DJs down the floor, or hanging out on the roof, and like there's just a lot of stuff going on, and little intimate places that you can kind of sit and hang. And that kind of reminded me of Limelight, because there's all these Limelight had these little pockets, like especially on that balcony up there. There's like little seating off to the side. You can hang out and watch this go-go dancer, and then you know you can go downstairs into the chapel and find like a little cozy spot or something like that, or you could hang out in those bunk beds in the back that the club kids put up with the wind, the two-way glass. So, but yeah, you know, it's just when you go. I think there was a long run there for a while in Brooklyn, and those warehouse parties where there was just everything was burlesque, everything was acrobatics, everything was like, and that all is wonderful. I raised my daughter doing a lot of that stuff, but I don't see like a real big mix. I hate to say it, it's like there's a lot of white people, especially going into further parts of Brooklyn, and so some of these parties don't really represent the people out there. Some of these murals that I see splashed all over, those are big, beautiful paints that are being put up in Bushwick, where those big places are, like where the old 3rd Ward used to be. Do people there understand those murals? Do they really reflect what's going on in that area, or are they? I don't know. It's like kind of saying gentrified or displaced. There's like 2 different things happening there. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. Cool.
All right. Stop there, or is there other?
Nothing I can think of about Limelight.
I mean, I remember you were my main access point to getting in there, and Julie, like the people that were.
Oh yeah, Julie, yeah.
And I remember we went down there we brought our sketchbooks there a few times. Remember that?
That was my first foray, and when I came down to visit Andy, when I came down for my first extended stay with Andy, he would always be, and I didn't know anything about New York City, but I'd leave it up to Andrew, who in his hometown had his own like little club that he started, and him and his friends would be like, hey, you got a comp? Everybody's like, you got a comp? And so there was always this like trading of comps. Yeah, I think I got a comp. And I even looked at the old poster that's sitting right back there at Disco 2000. It says like $5 with invite and $10 without. Whoa! really expensive stuff. And so Actually, I want to delve into that just for just a quick
Yeah,
second,
please.
because that poster is so hilarious because it's in 3D, but you can tell it was made by club kids who have a lot of procrastination. And it says, the top line says, so it says a Disco 2000 in 3D, and then there's a sign under it, like a label underneath it, that says, giant 3D things all over the dance floor. They don't have it quite figured out yet, but there will be giant 3D things all over the dance floor, but we got to get that flyer out. And then it says like three DJs, these 3 DJs, and they have like Kyoki and, is that right? DJ Kyoki, right? And then and some other guy, and then and surprise guest. So a surprise guest was definitely somebody that they have not figured out yet. But somebody said, wouldn't it be great if we had 3 DJs, because this is 3D. And Coming At You Installations by Jeff Font. I mean, I was talking about this with my dear friend DJ Shaky, Julie Covello, and when I was explaining that to her about this poster, she goes, "Youth wins." So speaking of which, so we'd hang out at Greystone Hotel, SBA housing, and it's Andy, me, and there's another kid, and we would hang out, and Andy got me wearing like trench coats, very kind of like early Beastie Boy stuff. All we were missing was like the big fur hats. We had these like pimp coats, and we'd carry like a side bag and had all of our drawing supplies, and we'd go in there and we'd just draw, and whatever we saw, we'd just draw, and whatever, it wasn't just even sometimes pen, it was just like sometimes you'd have like a bottle of ink, and like you'd just be with there, and I mean you just full on, you just like turn into like a little studio, just we're sitting there on the sofa, and we'd wander around and sit and see where we got the best view, and then we'd draw, and then sometimes we're even drawing on the subway platform on the way there, and sometimes we're, it's just, it was great, it was a great time, and it was also on slow nights where you didn't have to stand this long line out front to be chosen, one of the chosen few, to come and get in. Yeah, and there was just always a line outside, that's for sure. But I think we went on nights that didn't involve that, and it was pretty quiet, and we could just hang out. And it's actually, yeah, as far as like a club goes, it was like a nice hangout spot. It was like pretty sweet. You didn't have to go there to be like raging. You could just go and chill and relax and hang out. Yeah.
Nice.
I think I still have some of those little drawings too.
I couldn't find it.
I think I do. I think I have one of some girl who sat next to me, and she had this champagne glass, and she was like cozying up, and I was drawing her, and then I showed it to her. She says, "Let me see." And she said, "Is that what I really look like?" She's a very Mindy Kaling character.
This is wonderful, Jan. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
no problem. I hope you get something out of
Stop the
that.
recording
Yeah.
now.